Aloha, all you beautiful stewards of the land, humanitarians, and solutionists. I want to welcome you all to another dose of positivity. Look where I am today. You're going to get to see there's such a beautiful day here on the Big Island where I have the privilege to interview passionate change makers, thought leaders, social and environmental innovators, and wellness professionals. And I'm super excited today because, as most of you know, I'm writing a new book called Death, What Is It Good For? And the topic of this show is called Embracing the End, an exploration of death doula care. And it's the most, you guys, you would think, oh, that's so like, ooh, but it's not. It's so uplifting. And wait till you meet my special guest, Ruth Boydell. She is a spirit from tuning in all the way from Newcastle, Australia. So thank you so much for everybody who's on the live show, everybody who's listening to us on the Facebook channels where we're restreaming live right now, and to all those who are here listening to the replay. You're welcome, welcome. Please put your questions and your comments in the chat, and we will make sure to get to each and every one of you. And reminder, this is a live broadcast, so even if you're in a Facebook group, ask a question. Tell's here in the house who's going to be monitoring all the conversations. We'll bring them forward into the live stream. So, you guys, open your hearts to this conversation, and I want you to also to open your hearts to a poem that I'm going to be publishing in my book, Death, What Is It Good For? And I'm going to open this with just from my heart to read this with you, and this gives, because more people are coming in the house right now, so all of you welcome who are coming in right now. This is a poem in my new book coming out. It's called Dying with Dignity. And then Ruth, I'm going to bring you in, read your bio to everybody, and you and I are going to have a very enlightening, transformative conversation with all these beautiful people who showed up today. Dying with dignity. When it's time for us to go and our journey here is done, may we leave the world with grace and our dignity still won. For life is but a fleeting moment, a precious gift we all receive. And through our time here, and though our time here may be short, our impact we can leave. So let us face our final days with courage and with pride, and cherish all the memories of the life we lived inside. May we be surrounded by loved ones and know that we are not alone, and to feel the comfort of their presence as we make our way back home. Let us embrace the unknown with a peaceful heart and mind, and trust in the universe to guide us and to bind. For dying with dignity is not about the things we leave behind, but it is the way we lived our lives and the love we've left to find. So let us celebrate the journey and the path we choose to take, and leave this world with dignity, a legacy we can make. Oh. So, you guys, without further ado, I want to introduce you to this most magnificent, beautiful human who I met most recently. Ruth Boydell is end-of-life educator and doula, and she has inspired me and given me lots of good intentions for what she's one of the people I'll be interviewing for the final phase of my book. And she helps people by providing gentle guidance through this natural part of life. Thank you, Ruth. Death and dying. From diagnosis through transition to post-death particulars and rituals, she guides us and compassionately and provides reassurance along this journey we call life and death. As a death doula, sometimes called a death midwife, she gives sensible, heart-centered advice with common sense solutions. She provides a gentle guidance to ensure that the final journey resolves with dignity, grace, and honor. And Ruth does a lot more because she helps people, and you'll learn in our interview. And Ruth, I want to just welcome you so much, because today we are going to be talking about how speaking about this part of life joyful while we're still healthy in body and mind. And so, Ruth, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And I want to welcome everybody who's on the show, and again, invite you to raise your hand and ask questions, put your questions in the chat. And I hope you enjoyed my poem. And it was very liberating to write. It was freeing. And I encourage all of you to write your own poem about dignity of life and death. So Ruth, thank you so much for being here. Your links are in the chat if anybody wants to look up more about what Ruth does. But Ruth, before we get into a whole line of questions, I would so appreciate if you give us a little history of how you got to this place in your life.
Thank you, Donna, and thanks everyone for being here. Well, first, what is a death doula? And it's a non-medical support person for people transitioning life. I came to this, I'd been a sailor and a teacher of navigation, and I, had nothing to do with life, death, the universe, or anything except as a contemplative person. But I had my own near miss, and I had something called a transient global amnesia, and that is where I had an incidence of severe pain from a condition that I have, and it caused me to be in my full dementia. Who am I and why am I here? The usual questions that a philosopher might ask. And my husband was with me at the time, and he said I knew nothing but was interested in those questions. 4 hours later, I came back into my body, but I felt that I'd been sent somewhere, that I'd been seen through the veils, I suppose, and that was my sense of myself is now, I really got a sense of myself as mortal, and my mortality was bliss, that death is not the end, and that I had been somehow given a gift of seeing through the veil. And I have no memory of it, but I just felt sense of that. And so I really wanted to retain that feeling of bliss, because I knew I would forget it. We know we lose those moments of peak experience and they become memories. And I just talked to people about death and dying and what it all meant. And a friend said, oh, you need to talk to a doula. And not long later, and I didn't know what a doula was, and not long later, I discovered that there was doula training in my community, within a few weeks. So, of course, I jumped on that course and learned a bit more about end-of-life doulas. And there are birth doulas, and an end-of-life doula really is does the same role. And some people do both birth and death doulaing. And I believe that's because back in the village, in the Western culture, that person would have been generally the old woman who was unafraid of birth and death, and was the midwife and the death doula as well. So whether that was the role of the crone, I don't know, but yeah, that felt like a place for me to explore. And in those explorations, I don't think I saw myself as a doula, but having once done the training, and I kind of followed that up with additional training with other doulas, I found myself in that role.
Mm-hmm. So when you did this, how old were you, and how long was this after you had that experience?
Okay, so I had the amnesia about 6 years ago, and so I've really been a doula not about 6 years, and certainly the last 5 years I would label myself as a death doula.
Mm-hmm. And so were you attracted to like doing this just because it was a calling, or was it because of a business, or what was it that really brought you in? Because it's not a choice everybody would look for a career to do.
No, thanks. They're great questions. What really drew me into the work was who are we in consciousness? That's what I want to know. I'm actually interested in who we are while we're alive. Who are we now, and how can we prepare ourselves for understanding death as a natural process, because our society certainly doesn't encourage that. But I would like people, I say to people, how do you live your best life now? That's really the premise on which I work is, we all want to be our best selves in this life. Whether we have one or 100 lives, we don't know. How can we get the most out of who we are right now, right here?
Yeah. So Ruth, when you are working with the people, I'm sure you come across a lot of different kinds of people in different phases, and you're also dealing with family members and things of that nature. And you're in Australia, and we have people on the call in Canada and in the Midwest, and I'm in Hawaii, and we have people from the Philippines. It's kind of amazing. So this conversation is like, I'm always going back to social and environmental justice issues. What were like culturally indoctrinated to feel around something such as death. I mean, like whether it's a pet or a loved one or someone who really, really pissed you off. I mean, there's so many, who tormented you your whole life and then they die. I mean, you're dealing with, a broad stretch, or like you mentioned earlier when we were talking, what a fetus dies at birth, right? So you're coming across all kinds of death and all kinds of situations. And what have you learned, like culture? I mean, you're in Australia, right? So we're all over the place. So what words of wisdom from the experiences that you have can you share with us to help us break this cultural stigma around this?
I think my understanding of the history of the death industry, and I call it that deliberately, was kind of post the American Civil War, actually, was when there were so many people dying at that time, and that it became an industry to look after the bodies of the dying. And so funeral parlours and funeral homes were developed then. And because prior to that time, people were brought into their own living rooms, into their own parlours, in terms of looking after a body, having the community come in and visit to talk to the person as they either are actively dying, for villagers to come and say what they would like to say to the person who's dying, and then to pay their respects after they've died. So it was a very normal thing to have a viewing at home, to be in vigil before the death and to be in vigil after the death of a person. And as you say, they're not always beloveds. They may be people that have been very close to us, or a neighbour, or somebody that perhaps we've had a very entangled emotional relationship with, but we still wish to respect them and love them or honour them in a way that that we can do our best to make amends in that experience. Yeah. So I have looked after, I have to say, most of my clients at this stage have been the adult children of elderly people who are dying, because they often find me on the internet, or they've been reading about doula and what a doula might do. And most of my job is reassuring families that they can look after their person at home, so that a person might be able to die at home, either with the support of what we in Australia call palliative care, and I believe in the States you call hospice as an approach to healthcare in the home. And that hospice and palliative care support can be attained. But I know the statistics are that many people call the ambulance and end up in emergency departments, even if they're not really wanting to die in hospital, but the family panics. So there might be that call to the ambulance to take somebody out of home. But if they've got a confident, reassuring presence to say, you know, this condition, this type of breathing is quite normal at the end of life. You don't actually need to call the ambulance. We can do this at home, and support your person to die at home. I can provide that reassurance to the family and give them confidence to support their own people in their best way.
Well, I just want to just interject two things. That we do have palliative care, and then hospice is kind of like a sequential step, but it's all, a lot of it is relatively new, even hospice. And the way, like, I think that history, that bit of history you gave us all is really important, because we're talking about what happened during the Civil War. Wasn't that when you said that, when with so many deaths, and it became a capitalist enterprise, death, people started encroaching on what is a privilege to live and to die. And natural childbirth, doulas were, and midwives were poo-pooed, and birth was supposed to happen in the hospital. Death was supposed to happen in the hospital. And we all have to take a good look at that. I'm really loving that you're bringing this to the forefront, to the surface. And when do our rights, when do the rights of our birthright and our death right become dignity again, where we feel in control, like we're not breaking the law, we didn't call the ambulance, oh my God, we were negligent. And what I hear you saying is what a death doula or even hospice comes in, and because it's scary as shit. When I was there with my mother when she took her final breath, which was in a sterile hospital, and if you've all read my book, some of you have, Living Like the Future Matters, a beautiful story in there that I read a couple of weeks ago about my experience seeing my mother's aura leave and having that opportunity, which is why I'm so fascinated. And the fact that my mom lives vicariously through me, and I've got mass quantities of goosebumps right now. My mother comes through me. I'm not afraid of death. I'm one of those people who will mourn and grieve, and I pre-grieve. And these are some of the things, some of the tools I'd like you to go into too, to help us prepare for it before you need a death doula, right? But I think it is such an important conversation to have without of course, there's going to be huge emotions, and there's going to be goosebumps, and there's going to be people that we love who come into our beings if we believe that's who we are, right? And I want to assure people from my perspective, and why I'm writing this book too, is that let's look at this. Let's look at this end of life thing as the beginning, or the transformation, or the transition, like transfer. Adele, you were saying earlier, it's a transition time. Like, and talk to me a little, or to all of us, how a death doula prepares people in that time of like immense grief. I mean, it's so important to grieve. There's no doubt in my mind. It's how we grieve and how long we grieve, because we're going to grieve every day, because we're losing our skin, we're losing, you know, parts of ourselves we don't like.
Yes, there's a saying that says the only way to get through grief is to grieve.
Yes.
You know, there's no escape from it. It's part of our human response to regret, shame, guilt, to the loss of people who we love dearly and deeply. It's also relief at losing someone who has suffered. It's relief of not of being able to let go too. There's a huge part of that that perhaps isn't expressly stated as a grieving process, but the relief of letting go as well, because particularly when we've watched someone dying and transitioning through a long period of time, the whole family might be exhausted through that process. And so relief is part of that grief work. It's just, it is exhausting. And I really actually take a lot of time to encourage people to care for the carer through that time, because that person's gone through a huge amount of their own kind of secondary loss.
I love hearing you say that. How do you do that? Let's dive into that a little bit, because I'm sure all of us know somebody who's going through that, or will be, or has been through
well,
that.
I certainly can speak from my own experience. My husband was a paramedic, and he had post-traumatic stress and a lot of depression from being in that role for such a long period of time, and I was caring for him. So even prior to my my own transient global amnesia, and I'm sure the amnesia was also part of my response, my caring role as well. So not only for my own pain, and but it was a response to caring for Dave. Dave did take his own life 3 years ago, and I can tell people the huge relief and release that was for me, because I had been looking after him for 6 or 8 years in his very high, low depression, anxiety, very felt experience of post-traumatic stress. And I know I picked up a lot of PTSD myself in that experience. And so, so I can sit in this space and say the relief of someone taking that choice to end their life, or the relief of no longer having to be in that role, is incredibly huge.
Yeah. It's a whole different experience than losing someone in a sudden accident and not having been prepared. Like you were prepared 3 years ago. You had 3 years of being a end of life death doula under your belt, say.
And you asked if I was called to this job, and I think that was part of what called me, was to actually understand that I needed to let Dave go, to actually know that there was a lot of love there, but to understand that he was going on his own journey, and that was his journey. And I think that's what I can bring to families, is that when our person is transitioning, they are going on their own journey, and we can walk beside them, and we can hold their hand, and we can love them as best we can. But there is a point at which they will be traveling into either the between worlds for a period of time, or crossing over into their next life. And as you said, you experienced that in your mother's death, and understanding that then you might take something else on in that experience.
Yes. Yeah.
And they say a lot of people die when their beloveds are out of the room. You know, they need to do work to let go of this life. It's very hard to. And Dave, my paramedic husband, used to say it was really hard for people to die. That to actually witness them let go. He was 25 years a paramedic, and he saw a lot of people. It's hard to let go of this life. This is a juicy, rich, exciting, glorious, and enticing place to be. And even people who are, you know, well on their way in age and frailty, it's hard for them to step through, because, you know, why would you leave this exciting place?
Yeah. Unless you were Dave or someone like Dave, and then having the acceptance.
That's right. Unless you were a person that had looked at death. And I think I had the gift of looking at death long enough with him to understand that that he was making a real choice for himself.
I love how you, I mean, I could taste the juiciness of life. I could see the expressions on some of the people who are in the live. You know, it's kind of a relief. I mean, yeah, I mean, life is freaking awesome. And it is such a gift and such a blessing. But I think ever since I started talking about end of life, or, you know, what, you know, just thinking about my granddaughter and her wedding, if I could go, or whatever, you know, and just thinking, I turned 65 this year, you know, when the Medicare card came in the mail, I had a whole meltdown. But then, you know, so all of this, and then I thought, well, I got to do something with this. So I'm writing this book, right, which is super cool, because I get to interview people like you and talk about this subject. And I just think the juiciness of life is what makes the death part of life part of the joy. I mean, you guys, one of the things that I encourage everybody to do, and I write about this, is it's like, write your legacy, you know, paint out exactly what down to what you want to be wearing, how you want to be buried, you know, what kind of you know, I want to have nimchaga oil all over me, you know, what kind of flower, you know, like planning a wedding. And sometimes, like when I was doing this process for myself, or, you know, as I write it, I'm like laughing. I'm having a ball. I'm seeing all the people looking down on me. And so I'm getting it all in order right now. Everything down to like the songs, to the food, to like, the party, the celebration of what I'm doing, because it's so juicy. If we can plan a wedding and we can plan a baptism, you know, and you know, find the joy and the juiciness in doing that now. And some people will say to me, when I get all excited and all juiced up about that, they'll say, well, I don't care, I'm going to be, you know, I'm not going to be here, I don't care. And you know what, but other people do care. The other people around you do care, and they want to have the permission to not be all glum and not grieve in such a way that they can't get out of bed for weeks, maybe a couple days. But they want you to feel like, you know, they want to feel like, wow, what a gift you gave me, so I can celebrate your life. And it is much harder when a sudden accident happens. So it's even more important, because we don't know. None of us on here, none of us who's listening to the replay, none of us know what's going to happen tomorrow or in the next 10 minutes, for that matter. or in the next minute. So it's just like, why not? So is that part of your death doula? Is that part of being a death doula? Because if it is, I might consider the occupation, hanging around.
I think it is. I'm just going to see, Alan's got his hand up, but I'll just say I have organised and supported people making their living funeral, so living wake, where they've had the party before they died. And because some people really do want to have what they want. And I've been able to encourage people to do that. And it's been such fun to be able to have all the people in the room while they're still alive, and they get to argue the stories, whether they're true or not.
That is so good. That is so good. Well,
let's go to Alan and see what Alan's question. Yeah. You'll have to unmute Alan. Alan, you're muted.
If you can't unmute, don't be silent. Put it in the chat. Or maybe can you unmute him? Let's see. No. Yeah, we can't hear you, Alan. Put it in.
I know how to do it. I got it. I had it.
All
right. When you leave this mortal vehicle, you'll be observing what is done to it, so to speak, for a continued period of time. Is your choice. It'll be your choice when you want to move on to a higher plane, let's say. But you'll be around watching. That's why they say when a person passes, don't mess with the body for about 3 days. Let things transition, let memories and stuff, just the whole works, give it time to take care of 70, 60, 40 years of life, whatever.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. That's true. They do say to leave a body for 3 days. That's the spirit. I don't know. I call it the mystery, but there are beliefs that the spirit can leave, from 3 minutes to 3 days after the death of the person, and I know. I have other colleagues who will swear by that 3 days. I certainly encourage families to bring the person home if they can for about 3 days, and I have a cold plate that can allow that to happen. And what I've witnessed is just I can't say I can speak from the spiritual side of it, but I certainly can see that it helps with the grief and grieving to be able to have a cup of tea next to Grandpa and sit with Grandpa is a profound experience, and particularly for young people, to normalise death in their lives and to see that, Grandpa's now dead, I can make the noise. We can play this kind of game now because we've been decorating the coffin or whatever the kids have been up to. There's a beautiful, relaxed normalcy around a family gathering around the death of an elder.
Beautiful.
And as you say, Donna, that's an expected death, or usually an expected death. Unexpected deaths. The person will go to the coroner, and so the person is whisked away, usually, and that can leave either time for reflection. Usually, the coroner's office is very good at allowing family members in to that space as well. But yeah, having a normal time at home with someone who's died is immensely privileged experience.
Mm-hmm. Yes, totally. Well, I think also with the sudden death thing, that's why it's important for us to have these conversations with our loved ones. Do we want to be cremated, or do we want to have an assisted suicide contract set up beforehand? There's all kinds of things. Until I think she just put my recent blog in there. There's a bunch of very cool resources in there for you guys to look at on ways that, you know, it's kind of like having a living will, having your wishes. What do you want on your tombstone? You know, we talk about it, right? But because that keeps us alive. You know, my belief in the afterlife is real strong. So I don't have a problem. That's part of living like the future matters for me, is, you know, and not fearing death, and kind of intrigued and excited by it, but not for another 50 years. I want to break 100 if I can. So unless my body is in too much pain, and then I've already got all this wealth of juicy doulas. Like we've got another doula on the live chat with us, Adele. Thank you so much for being here today, because you guys are going to love meeting Adele. She's coming from the other side of the pond from Canada, who will be speaking. And she also put in the chat that hospice has only been around since 1970. Thank you so much for bringing that to my attention, because I thought hospice was around for a longer time than that. What took so freaking long, right? And how many people, I don't know, you know, you can put in the chat, but how many people even know that you can do assisted suicide, and how to go about doing it? Like if you're really suffering, or you really have a terrible depression problem, or you've had an illness for such a long time, how many of you know that you can do that? So, I mean, we these are our rights as we go forward, and I feel like there's something very empowering about. I like to be in control, right, of my life. So why wouldn't I want to have some control of my death? So anyway, but getting back to some of the patients and the people that you've worked with, and I know some of my friends who are been in hospice for a very long time, the family dynamics, and how do you work within the family unit to help with this transition as a death doula? Where's your place versus a hospice person, and how does it differ being a death doula or paleo care or hospice care? What is the difference?
Yep. So the difference is that palliative care is the medical support team that can come to your home to support a person who's got a diagnosis and a date of the terminal disease or their termination of life. Hospice, which was developed by Dame Cicely Saunders in the UK in the 70s, is an idea of a kind of halfway house, I suppose, between a hospital and a home. And so sometimes hospice is referred to the building and a place where people can die comfortably in a home-like situation with additional supports. But sometimes there's a hospice team that can deliver hospice at home, and that is kind of an additional support to the palliative care team who provide the medical support.
Yeah, so the hospice can administer meds and morphine and things like that. In a death doula isn't trained to do that, or licensed to do that.
No. And in Australia, death doula is not licensed. There's no registration here. I don't know about the US or Canada, but I believe, I understand. A death doula, really anyone can be a death doula. because this is the work from the heart. This is the companioning. This is the confidence. This is the reassurance that people are on the right path. So we're not necessarily advocating one response or another. We work in conjunction with hospice. We work in conjunction with palliative care. We work in conjunction with the physician. We work in conjunction with any of the medical support team. We're here to really provide a lot of psychosocial supports. I additionally trained as a pastoral care practitioner. I'm not religious, but I trained in the hospital to do that work. And it's a psychosocial support role. And a doula may accompany a family by being present, several hours a day. We might, I have in the past worked with a team of doulas where we supported somebody who had decided to voluntarily stop eating and drinking. And that was to hasten their end of life. So that's a decision people can make when they've had enough. And a team of 7 doulas worked in conjunction with the palliative care team to provide round-the-clock support for that person, to sit with her, to be in the room next door, to just to be present on behalf of the family who couldn't be there the whole time. So that might be one way that a doula can support a family. We can support a family by being on telephone call and just telling the family that what they're doing is fine, because sometimes people end up in hospital even if they don't plan to.
Right.
Particularly if there's a pain breakout or something like that, where it's felt that they could go to hospital to get their medications kind of balanced. And so I have had patients, families whose person has died in hospital, and I've been able to come into the hospital and support them in kind of making the hospital room more like their home, and give them confidence that they can kind of take over the space and enjoy their last days with their person and make it their own space, even though we've got all the flashing blinking lights. We can just help, just kind of take the edge off that a little bit, so it might be a very simple role, or it might be just to give a family confidence that they can ask for what they want in that setting.
Like a cup of tea, please.
Cup of tea. A doula can make lots of tea, can cook meals for families. A doula would not normally say they do the physical care of the person. We are really interested in that whole family psycho-spiritual support. But I do that. I do help toilet people or change them in bed, move them in bed, and so on. So while that's not a kind of a role that a doula might say they take on officially, at the end of the day, I'm just an extra person, family member who can be kind of there in the room with the person who's transitioning.
A caring, hopefully caring, I know you are, but a caring, loving, conscious person who appreciates the conscious and the subconscious. And that is really, and I know, a couple things before I move on to this about trainings, because I know there's since COVID, I'll just say this, and then I really want to get onto a question Adele had here, but there's, with all the mounting death and the continual death that we're having from just one disease, one virus that mutated and continues to do the same. I mean, it's really changed healthcare and the whole way
hospitals are run, and we haven't even seen all the changes until you have to get admitted. But the role of a death doula or end of life specialist is becoming much more desirable and needed more than ever before, because we've strayed so far. I mean, just imagine people who lost loved ones who couldn't, and I know some of us here on the call had this experience where you couldn't go and be and hold that hand and touch that person. And having a death doula on the other end with the people who were living was huge for those people, to help everybody cross over. And those little tasks amount up to be an enormous help with a lot of, getting back to the word from my poem, dignity, which is, we all want dignity when we die, and leaving a legacy of beauty. And again, by writing who you are, or whether it's a small little thing of who you are, what you want to be read, or how people to remember you, is really important. But Adele asked a really good question, and I got a little confused and fuzzy in this. And I'd like to use the last part, because we don't have much time. It always seems like when we're having a good conversation, the hour is almost over. And I'd like you to do some closing remarks. Before we do that, I want you to be thinking about, I just have a couple quick announcements, because we have like 10 minutes left. Just how people can get into this line of work, and also the difference between hospice volunteer versus death doulas. I mean, I really want to talk about that, but I also want to make note of that our next week's guest speaker she's talking about a whole different subject, but it's so interesting, because what I read last week or a couple of weeks ago from the chapter from my book is called Letting Go. And she's talking about letting go. Tel, would you put her name in the chat? I'm having a brain fart. Hoyt, Elaine Hoyt. I think she's awesome. And I want you all to come on with thinking of all the cool stuff we're talking to Ruth about letting go. This is just letting go of the things that when we're alive, right? And things that we need to let go to expand, to grow, to become better humans, letting go of disbelief and like, hey, we're gonna die. Let it going of that, like it's a bad thing to talk about. So we want to, and someone else is putting in there the death injuries from the COVID vax exceeds this, the virus itself. That we're not going to touch that subject right now, but I think it's really important to think about that. But Christy Holt is her name. She is going to be talking about letting go. We're going to be continuing this conversation, because in life we got to let go of not talking about things, whether it's death or diarrhea or, a shitty relationship, or, someone who screwed you over. I mean, we got to talk. It's that we got to, COVID shut us down, and these conversations we're having here is more like you and me, Ruth, right? But people are engaging in the chat, which is great. And what I want to encourage everybody to do, and then Ruth, you're going to go off and leave us with some really powerful words on how people can get into this. What I want to leave you all with is so much love and so much gratitude for showing up, sharing this episode with anybody who needs to let go. And get in touch with reality, that death is reality, and it doesn't have to be scary and horrible, and grief is real, and we're all going to go through it, and we're all going to experience it in our own way. But having people like Ruth and Adele, who's also on the call, and Desiree, I know you're here too, which is so fantastic. People who really understand this, who have gone through these life-death experience, who have seen auras leave. Talk about it. Plan your funeral, plan your daughter's wedding at the same time. You might want to use the same florist. I'm just making a joke, and I'm not making light of the subject, but I'm being real here.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Might as well kill two birds with one stone, right?
I really encourage people to get their paperwork in order, whatever age. If you're over 18, get your will written, and also to have an idea of who would speak for you health-wise if you couldn't speak for yourself. Who would that person be? And have those things in place, an advance care directive, which is your health wishes should you be unable to speak for yourself. And that is such a gift to your family, for them to be able to know what you would want in the event of you not being able to speak for yourself. And these are simple things to do. Prepare yourself for your own end of life, and such a gift to your family. I would just really urge anyone and everyone to get that done and put into place. So I teach doula now. I teach doula for Denise Love, and you could have a look at her. She was my first teacher. DeniseLove.net is her website.
We'll put that in the chat.
Yep. And thank you. And I teach her courses. So she's written the courses. I do a 10-week weekly module and support people through a Zoom meet up. And I also teach a 2-day doula course, which is more or less the same work, but it's in face-to-face. So we get a different energetic conversation going in that practical environment. And I'm happy to come just about anywhere, and I would love to come to Hawaii and to think about teaching a doula course in Hawaii. I think that would be the ultimate there, Donna, at your place. Yeah, I know. I love Hawaii. I love the Big Island, and I love the energy there. I've been there several times, and I'm happy to go again. Yep.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. We're gonna have to plan that and bring Adele along too. Desiree, you too. We could just have just a darling doula session, and the more people who are trained, the healthier we can live. And I really believe that.
And I think people can do the training either just for their own sense of understanding of the end of life, or they might train because they want a career as an end of life doula, or they might do the training because they have a person that they care for or that they know has had a diagnosis. And so it's all the reasons why you might do a doula course, and it is life-changing. I can promise you that.
I love this. It's very true. I like the way you said that. I mean, I got certified to be a holistic health coach years ago, and I did it just was to refresh my own stuff on nutrition, and I did turn it into a business, and I teach culinary classes, etc. Same thing with this death doula thing, just learning to do it just to help you learn to be a death doula for yourself too, and those who you love around you. But Alan wrote something that's really interesting. It says, birth is your entrance into this dimension, and death is your entrance into another dimension. Think about that. Oh gosh, Alan, thank you. That's really beautiful. That's really great. And we have like literally 6 minutes left. If anybody would like to come off and share, like Alan, that was really awesome. And you'll notice Tel put in something put our blog in there again. You guys could read this blog. It's really good. But it says, when we die, there is nothing scary on the other side. There is only love. So that brings us back to what we want to believe, right? And this end of life care and death doula stuff. Listen to me, stuff. It's very beautiful. It is really ceremonial, and you know what? It's really hard too. And that's why we talk about it. But you know, it's hard. It's hard planning a wedding too, right? When it's hard. to get up and do a job that you don't like every day. It's hard. And there's grief in that. And so it's really important to live like the future matters, right, Adele? It's really important to value. And you know, ever since I got to share this with you, and I know my husband's on, and I don't know if he's still listening or if he's got something in the background. But you guys, the more you start talking about this, and Desiree, I know you know what I'm talking about, but the more you can love in this life, the more the more I tell my husband I love him, the more I let things roll off my shoulders way faster than I ever did before. And so that's why we want to talk about it, because we don't want to be having all the weight of the world on our shoulders. And most of it's all fear. And the most of it's fear, if I do that, I'm going to die. Or if I do this, it's going to kill me. Even though we just say it as an expression, there's something up there that puts it into real life.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, don't make me do that. That's going to kill me. If I eat that, I'm going to die. You know, I mean, we say it every day. We use the word. So let's start really talking about it in a way that like a death doula or an end of life thing, and make our lives more rich while we're here today and make tomorrow a better day. So
thank you. And I encourage people, if you get a chance, to get to a death cafe. That's a place where somebody in your local area will probably run just a cafe meet up to have a conversation around death and dying. And of course, that means life. You know, any conversation around death and dying means we're talking about living and living life in our best possible way. So I urge you to have a look at that. I run an online death cafe, which may or may not work in your time zone, but
yeah, that's so great. Tel just popped in the link, Death Cafe. You guys definitely want to copy this chat. There's some juicy links in here.
And
really
that's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I've been part of is something called a threshold choir. And that is a place, a choir that sings for people in the on transition. And threshold choirs are all over the world. And if you'll bear with me, I might even just give you a little taste of what that is. So, can I stand here for you? May I use my heart as a gate? We may not need words, we may not need songs, we may only need our two hearts beating. So that's a kind of song that are not necessarily flat like mine, but the kinds of songs that we sing at the bedside, and we'll sing them in repeat, like a chant.
Thank you so much. You filled my heart with joy, and I'm speechless. So
I'm sure that's a tough thing to render you speechless, Donna.
Beautiful. I just want to thank everybody so much for showing up for this A Dose of Positivity. And we'll see you all next week with Christy Holt comes talking to us about letting go so we can live our best lives. And thank you, Ruth, so much for sharing your heart, opening us all up to the beauty of transition, transformation. And we look forward to having you back someday on the show and setting up an interview for my book. So big love to everybody. Thank you so much. We're going to go off live, and then if anybody wants to stay on after and ask any personal questions, we'll be on for another 10-15 minutes. And love to everybody out there in our Facebook group. We'll see you next week. Aloha.